everyone. Welcome to our Neuroscience and Public Policy 101 event. I'm Emily Rodriguez. I'm here with the Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience and Society, and this is our second of our NeuroX 101 series. In this series, we'll be exploring kind of a series of NeuroX fields. So that's kind of interdisciplinary spaces between neuroscience and other and other academic fields that people are working in. And so this week, we have a series of wonderful speakers speaking about their experience with the intersections between neuroscience and public policy. So we have with us here today, Jennifer French, Katie Sale, and Mark Raznick. I'll give a brief bio, and then we'll just hop into it in terms of like kind of a discussion on their work and their background and advice that they have for people who are interested in the field. As Francis is saying in chat, we are founded by the Dana Foundation, and if you go to neuroxcareers.org, you will find a lot of resources for both kind of the neuroscience and public policy intersection, as well as a bunch of other interdisciplinary fields that feature intersections with neuroscience. And also, if you have any questions throughout this initial discussion period, or you have any questions for Jennifer, Katie, or Mark, feel free to just put your hand up on your little Zoom profile, and then at the end, we'll get to everybody so that you'll be able to ask everyone questions. Okay? Okay, so introducing our speakers, Jennifer French is the founder and executive director of the Neurotech Network, a nonprofit organization that focuses on education and advocacy of neurotechnologies. As a result of a snowboarding accident, Jennifer lives with tetraplegia due to a spinal cord injury, and she's an early user of an experimental implanted neural prosthesis for paralysis. And she's the past president and founding member of the North American SCI Consortium. Katie Sale is the executive director of the American Brain Coalition, a nonprofit organization seeking to advance the understanding of brain functions, to reduce the burden and stigma of brain diseases and conditions in order to improve the lives of impacted people. And Dr. Mark Raznick is a distinguished professor of physiology and biophysics, as well as psychiatry, and the director of biomedical sciences neuroscience training program at the University of Illinois, Chicago, as well as chair of the board of directors of the American Brain Coalition and the National Association for Biomedical Research. So let's get started. How would you describe this kind of intersection of neuroscience and public policy? And how did you each get into the work that you currently do?
Right. Well, you wanted me to start, right? Okay. So I'm Mark Raznick. I am, in addition to the things that were mentioned, I am also the CEO of a small startup company, which is trying to promote the work that we do on biomarkers for depression. And that, that's really a crux of what we want to talk about today, because depression, paralysis, just about any brain disease also encompasses a great deal of stigma. Okay, and overcoming that stigma is an issue of social justice. And social justice is where I started out. Okay, in the movement against the war in Vietnam, I had been very involved, including going to Hanoi during the war to meet with the Vietnamese and create a peace treaty from American students that we could bring back. And actually, it was what Henry Kissinger signed 5 years and God knows how many lives later. At any rate, I'm an undergraduate. I'm working full-time for the National Student Association, helping to start riots on campuses around the US and really having a grand time. And my thesis advisor, my undergraduate advisor, calls me up and says, "So what's next? You're not going to do this for your whole life." And I said, "Well, I think I'll go to law school." And he says, "Why?" And he said, "Well, maybe I'll go into politics." And he says, "You're a traitor. You went to Hanoi. Nobody's going to vote for you. Listen, I have an idea. Why don't you get a PhD in biology, and you can be Mr. Chips on some college campus and be as left as you want, and no one will ever complain." And in fact, he set everything in motion. And in fact, sent me to graduate school with a friend of his from when he was a graduate student. And when I finished, but I was working with insects, but got into serotonin. And really what we do now has a lot to do with serotonin and the neurobiology of depression. So that's how that happened from the viewpoint of how did I get into science, which is not a traditional way. How did I get into policy? Well, again, when I had been involved in the movement for peace and justice and continued to do so while I was a graduate student, which caused a certain amount of consternation with the faculty, and continued to do it afterwards. And when I was a postdoc, I remember being a member of the New Haven Peace Council, and I was not only the youngest member, but I think the only one that wasn't also a member of the Communist Party. At any rate, so it's always been a part of me and always been a very important part of me. But one of the things that happened that got me into policy in a much more serious way was that one of our deans had been a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow. And the Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellows, now that's not going to be for the younger folks in the audience, because that's really for mid-career people. I mean, I was already a professor at the time, but what it did was it brought me to, he had done this for Tom Daschle, and he said to me, you know, you need to do this. And I said, I came up with all these reasons why I couldn't, because at the time, those were the good old days. I think I had 3 RO1s in the lab, and which nobody really needs, by the way. At any rate, he kept parrying me with reasons why I had to go. And so I joined the program. And one of the beauties of that program is that it's a very extensive introduction to policy in Washington. And we'll talk about this later, because learning how to speak to policymakers, learning how to speak to the person next to you on an airplane or on the bus, learning how to speak to the person next to you in a bar about what you do and why it's important to them is something we all have to do. And for the most part, scientists don't do it well at all. When I first moved to Washington and I started to talk about G proteins in the cytoskeleton, a woman from the Library of Congress said to me, "Don't ever talk that way in Washington again. Explain what you do in a way that's important to them." Okay. And it turned out that I had, we kind of looked at different assignments and interviewed with different members of Congress. Actually, one of the ones I was interested in was Paul Wellstone from Minnesota, who was just an incredible man. But I worked for a pretty incredible senator while I was there, and that was Ted Kennedy, who, if you were doing health policy, that was an amazing place to be, because even though he was in the minority, he never behaved that way. And all kinds of Republicans wanted to work with him because they knew that his expertise would move things along and get things going. Okay, and that was, I worked on several issues. The first one was organ transplant policy. I know that seems weird for a neuroscientist because we're not at the level of brain transplants, but frankly, it was a fascinating issue because it's not right or left. It was states that had vibrant transplant programs with too many donors, like Wisconsin, versus those that were in desperate need of donors, like Illinois, New York, New Jersey, even Los Angeles. The idea that the haves and the have-nots in terms of organs, not in terms of actual money. At any rate, I also did a lot of mental health work. We did a lot of work on stigma and learned a lot. At the end, most of the people, there was a cohort of 6 of us. 5 of them stayed in Washington, but I went back, because I still really like doing science. And even though I'm pretty old, I'm still doing science, and still, in fact, just got another grant for the next that started in November that will give me another 5 years. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a very interesting run. And the fact is that you can do both. Now, for the younger people, no, you can't do an RWJ fellowship, But the AAAS fellowships are routinely available, and they really get you into policy in a way that's very, very meaningful. So I think that I am, well, what do I have? 2 minutes? Okay, at the most. I guess I'm trying to think of what else I'd like to tell you. You have to do science well, you have to be excited about everything that comes your way, even when it turns out to be nonsense. But at least get excited initially. And without that excitement, it's hard to do science. And without that excitement, it's hard to do policy because you have to have the same challenge. You have to have the same motivation. In the case of, and you know what? In a sense, the motivation really overlaps because what I really want to do with my science and what I really want to do with policy is improve the lives of people throughout the world. So there is a confluence, and that's it for now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Mark. I guess
Yeah.
I will go next because I think Mark and I have the same background. So you'll be wondering, does she have the same thing to say? And I have a very different background. So it not literal, but how I got to where I got to. So again, my name is Katie Sale. I'm the executive director of the American Brain Coalition. So I think Mark is my boss. I report to a board of directors because we are a nonprofit. So that's sort of how we work here. My background's really different. I moved out to DC from Minneapolis with an undergrad in marketing and communications and a love for advocacy. I was leading our Take Back the Night at my college. So I was really interested in advocacy and marching on the Hill, and my friend in DC said, "Oh, get out here, and you can do this bigger and better." And so I did. I didn't know what public policy was. I just knew that I liked that environment. When I got my first job at the Society for Neuroscience, I could barely pronounce neuroscience. I had to say it at the interview. Before I went in for the interview, I was like, neuroscience. And that was, I was 21 years old. I worked my way up. I just fell in love with neuroscience. So I came at it completely opposite and ended up, I was the senior director, one of the senior directors at the Society for Neuroscience when I left and started the American Brain Coalition. And really, by then I had a lot of background in public policy and knew that it was important, and it was an important piece for Society for Neuroscience. And at the time, it was really the Society for Neuroscience was talking with the American Academy of Neurology. So really think the neuroscientists and the clinicians were talking, and they were saying to each other, we don't advocate with the disease specific groups. So we've got all these brain disease specific organizations out there, big and small, the large ones that you've heard of, the really small rare disease. But the clinicians and the neuroscientists 20 years ago, historically, were just not advocating together. We're not discussing, we're not talking with them. And so they recognized that there was a need to do so. There was a need for this very same messaging on Capitol Hill, which is really important. So talking about brain disease being larger than heart and cancer put together, it sends a clear message on Capitol Hill that you don't get when your very small rare disease goes up there and just talks about a small constituents. But so that's where the ABC came in. And just to I think it's important for me to just quickly tell you a little bit about the ABC so that you can understand sort of what we do. We represent, over 150 patient advocacy groups and professional organizations, like I said. So the professional organizations like SFN, like the American Academy of Neurology, both of the APAs. So I want to be clear that we also have mental health organizations represented as well. So when I talk about brain health and brain disease, I'm talking about neurological, psychological, and psychiatric diseases of the brain. We have academic institutions that we represent, that we work with, really important, as well as we have industry partners as well. So we really want to advocate together. We work really closely with government agencies in the brain space, and hear from them, learn from them what they're working on. You know, NIH institutes related to the brain, NSF, the VA, FDA, which I can kind of go into a little bit more, but recognizing that we're better advocates for them if we can see, you know, what it is they are working on, and working with them. We, in terms of we have a legislative advocacy focus in that we have teamed up with the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus. And if you don't know what a caucus is on Capitol Hill, it's comprised of both a Democrat and a Republican make up a caucus. It can range from there's a bike caucus out there. There's caucuses for every disease. There are so many caucuses, you should almost look up how many congressional caucuses there are. But we've teamed up with them on the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus. And really what that's meant to do is just, you know, we host a series of briefings and educational opportunities so that members of Congress and their staffers can easily hear about the exciting neuroscience that's going on. And speaking in lay terms, as Mark said, we remind when we usually have a neuroscientist, we'll have a clinician, and then we have a patient group or a patient talk about their experience. So somebody with lived experience really brings it home, and that's what they take away. They always take away that messaging of just how important it is. We're doing this to help cure and make lives easier for those with lived experience. So we do, you know, it's important to have these briefings, to have these, these touch points on Capitol Hill. And so we do a lot of that. Another part of our advocacy that we do is we work really closely with the Brain Initiative. So in funding for the Brain Initiative, and as it enters its 10th year, there is so much fun science that has come out of it, but we need to continue funding more so that we can learn more and more. ABC is a member of the Brain Initiative Alliance, along with other federal and non-federal agencies dedicated to sort of facilitating the coordination, communication of the Brain Initiative. So we have hosted briefings on the Hill. We have led sign-on letters. So members of Congress will continue to fund Brain Initiative funding, which is really important. Let me see what I started to touch on sort of what sign-on letters. So basically these are letters of support for pieces of legislation that affect the brain. And what we do, and what's really important that we do, is making sure that all of these groups that we represent are included in supporting these. So we sort of remind folks, this is why it matters to you. It might not be your specific disease, but it matters to the larger brain community. And so we will either lead some sign-on letters, we will make sure that others in the field know of some other letters that are being led from other organizations as well. So sort of saying, sure, this might not be your main priority, but it should matter to you. So we do a lot of that. That's more of sort of the legislation that we do. We work with different Hill representatives, senators, members of Congress, both, on the House and Senate side, obviously, in sort of some dear colleague letters that they will send as well. So if they're passionate about something, for instance, the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus is very passionate about Brain Initiative funding. So they started a dear colleague. And what that basically means is, dear colleague, dear you others, members of Congress, sign on to this to show your support so we can continue to fund this important neuroscience research. So that's kind of the premise of the ABC was formed so that we can all advocate together. And there's a drive to do that and make sure that we're sharing and collaborating and coordinating that as well. To be a good advocate, the ABC also makes sure that we are educating our advocates, because our advocates are at all different levels. So, and recognizing that some, it's not their day job. Some, are not used to going out to Congress and advocating. And so we make it easy for them. We have a Advocacy 101 broadcast series that really goes through the ins and outs of meeting with your member of Congress. We have started a series of webinars to educate members around the regulatory 101 process, the IRA. Everyone's starting to hear buzzwords, the IRA, CMS. So we just did one on the deep dive into CMS. And so sort of, how can we be good advocates if we're really not truly understanding what each of these areas within government agencies, have to do with the brain. So we do that as well. And then another piece that we do is really just a large social media presence. And we're recognizing that that's really important. And so we have that. I could probably go on and on about what ABC does, but obviously you can see I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. But I want to hear from you on questions that you have, because I know I just kind of threw it at you. But of course, let's hear from Jen first, and then we can open it up to some questions.
Thanks, Katie. Wow, how do I follow that? Okay, so that was a great intro, and and I am a lover of ABC as well, full disclosure. I just joined the board at the end of last year, so happy to be involved with them. So thanks everybody for taking the time out of your Monday evening to come with us. I have a very colored, oh, there's a hand up. So do we want to address hands up now?
I think I was thinking that we get through everybody's kind of personal presentations, and then we can address, because maybe the question will be addressed.
Okay, perfect. So yes, so I have a very colored way in the world that I got here, and I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. So I am not a neuroscientist. I am not an engineer. I'm not a policy person. Actually, I went to college to become a pilot. And at that time, pilots were not making a lot of money. So I decided that I don't think I could make any dollars off of that. So instead, I went and got my MBA in marketing and entrepreneurship. And that was actually my education in my past. So I actually started off my career in finance, and frankly got bored with it, and ended up going into tech. And I was working at a tech startup company in my earlier career. So that's really my colored world of, and I had no connection to neuroscience, but my connection to neuroscience and advocacy actually happened. I really fell into it, literally. I had a snowboarding accident. And as Emily mentioned, I live with tetraplegia and paraplegia. So tetraplegia from a spinal cord injury. And I'm an early user of a neuroprosthetic device. And so dealing with my own lived experience with spinal cord injury, I knew what technology was. And I really wanted to, when I was looking at, when people say there's no cure, well, what's next, right? And being in the tech industry, I understood technology. I understood electrical. It made sense to me. Electrical signals can actually impact the human body. So from a lay person's perspective, I kind of understood that, and that's how I entered the trial. I guess my aha moment of how I went into from a tech startup, which I actually went back to after my spinal cord injury. I was working there for several years, to the point of getting into advocacy and the work that I do today, is that so it was a few years after I had been implanted with a neuroprosthetic that allows me to use my paralyzed limbs for various functions. I was at an NIH meeting. It was the Neural Interfaces meeting. At that time, it was on the NIH campus, and I was on a panel of other early users of technology. So there was a cochlear implant user, a DBS user, and I believe another neurocontrol user, a person who used a neuroprosthetic for their hand function. And talking to everybody else on the panel, we all had the same struggles. We were very early users. No one in our communities, meaning the deaf community, the Parkinson's disease community, et cetera, really didn't know about neurotechnology, and really the awareness and understanding and how people found out about neurotechnology was extremely difficult. And that was my aha moment of, geez, like, why can't we do something about this? This is crazy. So of course, before diving into anything, I do a landscape search. That's part of my MBA background. and really found that there was nothing. And so that was kind of the spark plug that got Neurotech Network started. And really to this day, you know, I don't have a background in technology. I don't have a background in neuroscience. But the important thing is that we are taking, if part of our advocacy work is taking very technical topics and translating those into layman's terms, which is much as what Mark and Katie were talking about, is that being able to tell stories in a meaningful way that people can understand the impact of what you're doing, to be able to communicate it in a meaningful way where people really want to listen to you, and really having some of those organizational skills. So even though I didn't have training in advocacy, and even though I didn't have training in neuroscience, the skills that I learned in college and being in the various businesses that I was in, to be able to apply those skills to advocacy applies in so many ways. So what Neurotech Network really does is we focus on education and advocacy, and that can take a lot of different forms. As Katie mentioned, advocacy and education really go hand in hand. We have to educate people about what we're doing before we can advocate for it. So part of what Neurotech Network does is we maintain a database of neurotechnology devices, therapies, and treatments that are in early stage or are available for people, so people can go and search by their condition, and really find those types of devices and learn about them. We tell real stories. So many times we see the videos of Inspire Medical or Exonics, and those are advertisements for us. And even though they have in the small print that this is a real consumer, when we tell the stories from the heart and they tell them from a different perspective, those real stories help to resonate with people that are living with the conditions, and those in developing them. And, you know, part of what we also do is in terms of community engagement, and I'm sure Mark and Katie have already touched on this, but community engagement is really important. So when we think about community engagement, it can take a lot of different forms, but the form that we found at Neurotech Network is that there were a lot of developers, people that are developing neurotechnologies that never talk to anybody with lived experience. And because of Neurotech Network has this network of patient advocacy organizations, community organizations, we had to find a way to connect them with the developers and be able to translate across those different languages so that they can help to communicate and help in terms of doing thoughtful design, from the early designs of neurotech to even the commercialization of it. So it's really important to be able to have that two-way conversation, if you will, not a one-way conversation, from developers along the spectrum. We also recently launched the implantable BCI collaborative community. It's the first one in the field of neuroscience and neurology. We're very excited about it. And it's only 7 days old, so don't be surprised if you didn't hear about it, because we haven't been around for very long. But the premise of it is that it's providing a community of multi-stakeholders, including industry, researchers, developers, patient advocacy organizations, policymakers, regulators, et cetera, to be able to work in the pre-competitive space to solve systemic issues, and understand that we look at regulatory science and implementation science to help drive our decisions. So that's a new initiative that has been launched recently. We're really proud of it. So what I would say is kind of look at your skills. We always think about what we were educated on. My degrees don't have a lot to do with what I'm doing today, but the skills that you developed along the way, you can apply them in a lot of different ways. And I'll yield back to Emily.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for talking about your backgrounds. They're definitely coming from a lot of different places, but you're all like passionate about your work, and I'm excited to see kind of the questions that people have about your backgrounds. If you have any questions, I see some in the chat. Feel free to put your hand up in the Zoom call, and I'll call you then. And then after we get through those, then I'll just read through the text that's in the chat so that we get to everyone. Okay, cool. Alina, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you guys so much for sharing your background and about what you do. Something that I'm interested in the field of neuroscience and public policy is the impact of the, sorry, excuse me, the impact of the environment on the development of neurodegenerative disease. And I was wondering if at the American Brain Coalition, any of your, like what discourse you've had with maybe policymakers about kind of tackling that issue.
That's a great question. And I think, Mark, you can probably answer it better in terms of coming from neuroscientists and some discussions that have been made on it. I know it's definitely a hot topic. So when we sort of talk about different hot topics, up and coming topics, that's one of them. And it's not going away. So and we've already talked about that, having a congressional briefing on it so that more folks can get educated on it. So that's kind of where we come into play, is, you know, where we can educate more members of Congress and that kind of thing on it. I think Mark wanted to touch more on sort of from a neuroscientist standpoint. And Mark, you're on mute.
Just very simply, no, the problem isn't going away, nor are the toxins. Our point of view is trying to do the science, to try to help establish what is it, what is the mechanism whereby these things are creating the problems that they do. But interfacing with those people who are trying to prevent those chemicals from being introduced to us is probably something we should take more seriously.
And thank you for your passion in that.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, it's definitely a deeply rooted systemic issue, but happy to hear that it's being talked about.
Thanks, Selena. Harry?
Yeah, that was a really good question. Tough follow-up there. One of the things that I'm kind of struggling with right now is I have a undergrad background in neuroscience, and I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in public health. And I'm struggling to find how to, and obviously that's part of coming to stuff like this, but how do you balance wanting to contribute to neurotechnology while also being a part of the time-consuming process that is advocacy? Like you guys mentioned, the skill of speaking for policy is something that you have to like cultivate as a skill, just like you have to cultivate research skills. And I was wondering if you guys had any insights on how you balance doing research and being an advocate, especially early in your career without credentials, so to speak.
Mark, you want to take that and then I can get on my soapbox? No, I'm kidding.
It just happened. It just happened. You know, as I said, the advocacy, the impetus for social justice started before the science. So it just never went away. And yeah, when you're younger, people aren't going to listen to you anyway. So you figure out how to do things where you can make a difference. Maybe write more and speak less.
But Harry, to your question, I'd love to address this, is because community engagement is at the intersection of neuroscience and community engagement, right? And so you're in the public health space. That public health space, you can use that skill of understanding what happens in the community and how that can help drive development in the neuroscience space. So using those two skills, you can really intersect those from an advocacy perspective, but also the impact that you can make in your career in terms of working in either the public health space in the government side or in the private industry side, of really starting to understand some of the public health, not only policies making, but also some of the public health data collection, that how we can make more intelligent decisions in neuroscience. So great intersection for advocacy work.
Thank you so much.
No. I was just going to say, I would just add to not be discouraged by feeling like you don't know much about advocating, because it doesn't matter. You don't need to know a lot. You will learn as you go. And and then also, if you don't have a lot of time, you can still advocate because you can just do as much as you need to. And from that, you will end up doing more. I think, in terms of, and not to, someone had asked, well, how do you become an advocate? You become an advocate by just simply answering, I'm going to write to my member of Congress. Oh, somebody just gave me this action alert. And all I have to do is click on it that says, I am a constituent. And then you become an advocate that way. Or I was invited up on the Hill to talk with a group of individuals. So it's really easy. It doesn't have to, it's not necessarily easy either, but it can be easy if you want to be pursuing your, neuroscience degree as well, and your research and that kind of thing.
Sorry, not to take up too much time, but you brought up a really good point there. I I recently got a really great opportunity to go visit DC and do some advocacy work for vaccines, but I'm struggling to find things of that nature for neuroscience where the opportunity to advocate and go to DC yourself and speak to those Congress members. I mean, granted, maybe it's just me being new to this space a little bit. This is my first time attending an ABC event, but I was just wondering what advocacy looks like for somebody not living in the DC area, at
You know
least
what it
in
looks
regards
like?
to neuroscience.
I'll tell you what it looks like. You don't have to go to DC. Your member of Congress spends at least a third of their time in the district. And if you go to visit them in the district, there's a much higher chance that you'll actually have a face-to-face meeting with the member. And even if not, you'll have more time with the staffer to talk about what's important to you. So don't assume you have to be in Washington, because you can make a big impact without ever getting on an airplane.
And don't forget that they work for you. So you can go as an individual and talk to them and tell them about some of your concerns. You don't necessarily have to come, with an organization. So just remember that as well.
And sometimes we think that, everything is transactional. And, we say this in business a lot, that, relationships are everything, but it has to do with whatever you're in, whether it's in neuroscience or public policy or advocating. You want to build those relationships with your representatives and the members in your office. So when they have an issue, you become the expert that they're going to go to that's within their own district. So, so think of it that way, as well as build the relationships with those who are representing you.
Thank you guys so much. Those were all amazing answers.
And thank you for your question, Harry. That was great. I'm seeing Chanel.
Hi, really great talk. So thank you, Katie, Mark, and Jen. I'm here representing the Forum on Traumatic Brain Injury at the National Academies of Medicine. It's a relatively new group, and it's a multi-stakeholder consortium of providers, clinicians, patient advocacy organizations, regulators, et cetera. And the mission is to have a recurring sort of a regular meetup of folks who are really passionate about accelerating research and care. And as part of our charter at the National Academies of Medicine, we don't advocate, but we sort of gather the folks that do advocate, and then through hosting workshops or by writing consensus studies and putting out recommendations, can help shape the direction the field is moving. So my question is, as a very young group, this group is about 1.5 years old. We're trying to figure out what best practices are for engaging with community members or engaging with folks with relevant lived experience. And then there are a couple of different models that I've seen. So I'm curious, maybe this question would be for Jen, what model, or for Katie also, which models of patient engagement you find most helpful or most impactful. So the examples I've seen are if you have a workshop, that you would put folks with lived experience on the planning committee, or you have them speak in the workshop. Some people have a dedicated session just for people with lived experience. And that's sort of like one-off ad hoc. You have an activity and then you involve people in the planning of that activity. Another model is where you might have like a patient advisory group that you can tap in on an ongoing basis. And I'm sure there are other examples I'm not thinking of. So when it comes to partnership with a think tank, or a policy institute like the National Academies, What are your thoughts on optimal ways of engaging that really fill a gap in the advocacy space? Because again, the National Academies itself doesn't advocate, so we kind of have an interest. We wear an interesting hat, so we're trying to think about the best ways to just leverage our place in this landscape.
Hi, Chanel. Thanks for that question. And then Katie and Mark, please chime in. So for fear of sounding like somebody from the FDA, it depends. So there's no cookie cutter model of engaging the community. It's really looking at what are you trying to achieve, and then looking at the culture that you're working with, and then building your model of engagement around that. A couple of things that I would warn against is make sure that you don't do tokenism, meaning that you put a few stakeholders up there and then they represent the entire community. So that's a really important piece to make sure that you don't fall into that to that area. So it can take a lot of different forms of advisory boards or community discussion tables. There's or surveys. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And in fact, I'm going to put this in the chat. We have on our Neurotech Network website a lot of resources of engagement, of ways to do engagement, that learning from so many other organizations that are developing engagement models. So looking at all of those different models, look at who you're working with and what community that you're trying to build on to figure out what type of model you want to work with. Let me give you one last kind of concrete example that might be good for you. Learning from the Parkinson's Foundation, they were trying very hard to get out Parkinson's information about Parkinson's disease to the Latin community in the US. And they were having a very difficult time trying to break through to that community. And they were trying to do it through clinics and local clinics, et cetera. They just were not doing it. And they went out and really did some discussions around community leaders and influencers to understand how that culture operates, because it's in a culture that they're not used to serving. And it turns out that the expert is not the clinician in that community. The expert is the community leader. So they had to go out and find the community leaders to help kind of escort them into the community to build that trust and then to have the engagement. So what I'm saying in that sense is that really looking at who you're trying to serve and then matching your engagement model around that. And I hope you can find some of those models in there. Happy to talk more offline with you too. Mm-hmm.
And I have two responses. One really comes from the idea of the American Brain Coalition, coalition building. And so traumatic brain injury does not exist in a silo. Those people with TBI, whether it's from the outside or inside, from stroke or cerebral hemorrhage, about 2/3 of them suffer from depression. So how about reaching out to the anxiety and depression community and saying, gee, this is a commonality we have. And you know what? And nobody understands why yet. So that would be great to know. But that's one thing that I was thinking could be useful. And then the other thing is you in terms of reaching out to other communities or to community generally, on the Hill, what are they? When you hold a hearing, the inspector used to be amazing for this. Dr. Michael Fox would be talking about Parkinson's, or Ambassador Richard Gere would be talking about Tibet. In other words, finding a person that may achieve a bit of, let's use the modern term for social media, an influencer, but one that could also be, for those of us who don't use TikTok, appealing. And see what they can do. Again, when I remember the spokesperson, the celebrity dealing with traumatic brain injury was Gary Busey when I was on the Hill. I don't really suggest recruiting him, but you know what? There got to be other people that you could form an alliance with. So right, it's all about coalition and alliance building.
And just to add very quickly, you said the National Academies doesn't advocate yourselves, but what you provide those white papers and those summaries, we use those. So we use them, you know, as tools for education, and they're really important. And so the fact that you're getting all these super smart people in the room and that you're recognizing the importance of including those with lived experience along with the scientists and the clinicians, and then you're establishing these, you know, these white papers that then we can look at and we can use and we can say, this is what the National Academies has said. I mean, that's really important.
Thank you so much. Tremendously helpful. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks. That was a wonderful discussion on that. Let's see, Mayank, I see has hands up.
Hi. So thank you everyone for all the great like insight on your different careers. So I'm currently an undergraduate student in Canada. I'm doing my bachelor's in neuroscience and computer science. I've worked with brain-computer interfaces, but I'm more interested in biomarker research, especially with depression. And I think this might be up Mark's alley, but I'd be happy to hear.
Contact me offline to talk about that one. Okay.
But more generally, I'm more interested in also like suicide prevention research and how different policy measures can be used to like lower suicide rates. So I was just wondering how I can be more involved in the space generally.
Well, if you're interested in suicide prevention, there are certainly, you know, in the US, there are several organizations, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention being one, but there are other smaller organizations. I'd be shocked if there weren't some in Canada as well. And, you know, going to them and saying, listen, this is my background. I'd really like to work with you. What can I do to help? How do I move forward with this? They won't turn down an offer of free help.
And I agree. I think just getting your name in front of, and I will look as well to see if I can point you in the right direction to someone at the international level. And just, you know, to say, I'm interested, even just put me on your mailing list, because often there will be a time that you can start to, you know, advocate, or they'll need you for something, which is really important.
And just
Yeah,
to build, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to build off of what Katie said is, you know, a great way to find opportunities is to go out to those that are in that space now, and to see what work they're doing. That also tells you how you can get involved and how you might get involved, but also it helps you to find opportunities and gaps where you can make an impact. So, but go ahead, you were going to respond. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I have reached out to a few organizations, but sometimes like I think really big organizations also have member fees and other things associated with them. So that also adds like a barrier. But yeah, I have seen there's a few organizations in the space.
Can I just lay off of this too is, you know, sometimes we bear away from social media, but there are platforms like, for instance, on LinkedIn that have professional groups that talk very specifically on professional topics, and particularly in the brain space and the medical device space, et cetera. And that's another great place to find other experts in the field and really understand their backgrounds and how you can develop it as you go through your career.
Yep. Thank you.
I was just going to jump in to ask a question. I know Emily's going to move to some others on the panel, but this is Katie, specifically a question for you, which is that I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the job position that we recently posted on the Career Network. It's a really unique position to work with the American Brain Coalition. It's not one that we get to post very often. It's pretty cool, and it's part-time. And so could you just say a little bit more about what that position is, what you're looking for, and how people could apply?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to. So the ABC, which we didn't even touch on, was sort of the regulatory piece. And we have really tapped into that regulatory side of things and ensuring that the person with lived experience, the patient advocacy groups are represented in the in the regulatory conversation with FDA early and with the companies that FDA works with. So this particular position is on the Total Product Life Cycle Program, otherwise known as TAP, and it has just entered into its neuro space. So it is particularly for devices that have gained breakthrough status that are trying to work with the FDA and become what they're calling a TAP sponsor. And so what they're looking for is they're looking to link up these device companies early on with different organizations and different advocacy groups to really get the input of the person with lived experience early in the process. So ABC has formally started to work with them in this project and sort of what we're calling it, we're collaborating, we're convening, we're aligning these different groups. It'll probably be, disease specific when it gets into, or sort of disease areas and whatnot. So we're very early in the process, but we are looking for somebody that can work very part-time. It's a 10-hour, we're looking at about 10 hours a week, but somebody that can help me manage this sort of stakeholder engagement is what we're saying. So when we mean stakeholder engagement, we're looking for somebody that can meet with the different disease organizations, including, ABC's membership, even outside of ABC's membership, talk with them, sort of feel out where they fit in this process, develop sort of this profile so that then the next step is kind of engaging them with the device company and sort of through the process of ensuring that they're involved in, every step of this sort of this device, ensuring that they're involved or their voice is involved in with this device company. So what I'm looking for is somebody that obviously project management has some idea of, the FDA and the ins and outs of FDA, or at least has interest in that kind of thing. And can kind of be a project manager for this. I know I didn't do a great job of explaining it. Jen, did I miss something? You've been helping me sort of develop this.
Yeah, I think that was a great description, Katie. Thank you. One thing that that really this position will do is also not just interacting with the companies and the patient advocacy organizations, but interacting with FDA, with Katie and her team. So it's really about helping FDA build the capacity of them really helping to understand the lived experience perspective too. So it's really working with not just companies and patient advocacy organizations, but also having the opportunity to interact with FDA. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you for pointing that out as well.
Yeah, thanks, Frances, for bringing it up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up, Frances. And I think you said you shared that with folks so they know. Okay, great.
Yeah, for those who are already on our Career Network email list, you got it. And if you're not on it already, we'll put you on since you're here today and we have your emails. But Emily also put the information in the chat. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
No, and thank you. Thank you for discussing this opportunity. Once again, the link is in the chat if you'd like to know more about the position. We have a hard stop at 8 p.m. Eastern, but there's an additional question in here that I was wondering if you wanted to address briefly. Kira Irby is asking about how you might handle the challenges of presenting policies to Congress, meaning possibly facing rejections or concerns that you may have being ignored. That seems potentially especially scary for someone who's presenting about their lived experience. Yeah.
How many of you are actually neuroscientists in the field? Well, you've all experienced rejection, right? We're going to experience rejection. That's okay. Just don't get angry, okay? And come back and figure out a different approach. That's it. It's like sailing. Just keep tacking till you get where you need to go.
And you would be surprised, I have walked into an office that I know opposes what I'm about to say. And, and they have been very pleasant to me. So, I mean, and I was a nervous wreck inside. I was shaking. I thought, oh, this is going to go terrible. And you know what? They are very respectful because, again, remember that they work for you. I mean, they work for us, so they want to, at the end of the day, work with us in some way to make a, common ground. And the other thing is, everyone can get behind brain science. It's extremely important, and we need to cure these diseases. So if you just keep going back to that, if it's something that you think is controversial, start it with something that's not, which is that we're all affected. Everybody knows somebody that has a disease or condition of the brain. And so just keep remembering that. Say we have more in common than we don't.
That's so true. Everyone is connected to somebody that has some type of neurological condition, and you never know who you're talking to, what family member or what dear friend that they might have, that they have their own lived experience, and you should draw on your own lived experience too for your storytelling. And I know this cliche is used so much, but don't be afraid to fail. We can learn from that rejection that we get. If we learn from that, we grow, and we can improve our storytelling and improve ourselves as we move forward in our careers. So I'll leave it at that. We're at the hour.
Wonderful. Thank you to Katie, Jen, and Mark for speaking to your experience here. The discussion has been really insightful for anyone who's interested in getting into this field. I'm sorry if we missed your question in the chat log, but I'll be distributing the chat log to the speakers after in case they want to reach out and answer your questions. I just want to close off this discussion in part by pointing to our Career Network website. We've mentioned the newsletter where that ABC position has been posted already, but here at neuroxcareers.org, you'll be able to find both our newsletter, but also permanent links to kind of continuing opportunities with positions. And we do an annual career fair. You'll be able to see information about that. So feel free to visit if you have any additional questions about how you can get involved kind of across multiple different fields that intersect with neuroscience, or if you're interested in that kind of work. Is there anything that you'd like to say, Katie, Jen, and Mark, to close out?
No.
Just very quickly, do they have our emails addresses available to everyone in case they want to reach out?
I don't believe they are in the promotional materials, but we can put them out there. Would you like to? Let's see, we can follow up after the fact.
Yeah, just send people up.
I can put mine on right now. It's also on our website. So I should be everywhere on our website if you don't find me.
And mine is raz@uic.edu, which is pretty easy.
And I know how to get a hold of him. So you can always get a hold of me, and I can.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Well, definitely facilitate that. And a recording of this session will be posted online. So anybody who wasn't able to attend or wants to revisit any of the questions will be able to on our website. Oh, yeah, Jen, I feel like I cut off.
No, that's all good. I just put my LinkedIn. So
Oh, great.
I'm guilty of being late on my emails, but I'm much better on LinkedIn. So connect with me there, and love to hear from everybody. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Francis, for this opportunity. Thank you for all of you for taking time out of your evening to spend with us. And great to see you and Mark and Katie.
Keep it up. It's great. This is what
Thanks
we want.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good
Bye,
night.
everyone.